Sawbona. Look at your neighbor and say, I see you. No, say it like you mean it. Say, I see you. And look back and say, it's good to be seen. I'm going to start out giving you a little bit of context. First of all, I want to thank the Episcopals because they did do something different because I am not an Episcopal. Clap. So you started stepping out of your comfort zone. The other thing that we normally don't do in institutional settings is introduce ourselves properly. So, a little bit of introduction of myself. I was born in South Bend, Indiana, like right up the way. This is 31. And I've been living here in Indianapolis for the last 15, 16 years. And I live right down the street. The church that I go to is called Broadway United Methodist Church. How many people here that live in Indianapolis, raise your hand? How many of you know of Broadway? So I'm a member there. So I am not a staff person there. Our mission statement is, as followers of Jesus Christ, responding to God's love, our mission as people of Broadway Church is to be a cultural community that seeks, welcomes, and values all people. You know, if this is true, how do we live that out? In my neighborhood is known for Clifton and 33rd, MLK. Right down the street is Lilly Endowment, and then right down the way there is Broadway United Methodist Church to the east. Our neighborhood is known for every bad thing that you can name of: drugs, violence, and things of that nature. Anything that need to be fixed is found in our place. But what you don't see is a group of neighbors that are acting as agents together. What I'm about to tell you is not a mission of the church, but a mission of a person that go to the church that is actively seeking out God's abundance in the world. We call ourselves the Learning Tree. We're an LLC, and my neighbors are my business partners. I'm in the faculty of the Asset-Based Community Development Corporation out of Chicago. Everybody heard of ABCD? And John McKnight is a good friend of mine. We practice looking at the people's gifts and talents. And years ago, I started out being the roving listener, and my actual job title is to seek the gifts and talents of every single person in the life of the community, find a place for that gift, celebrate those gifts, find those gifts utilized in ways that build community, economy, and mutual delight. And I started that 10 years ago. My grandfather would say I started it when I was born. Last year, me and my neighbors got together and we wanted to figure out, what do we do? What do we do to change people's minds, what they see of us? How do we get to help people see what they don't see? So last year, we have an operating budget of about $50,000, which is not much. We divide that into, that's brought together between like 10 people. Half of that is philanthropically given out. Most of us don't make over 20 grand. In the last 8 months, that block of 33rd Street has allocated $2.2 million of assets that was spread around in the 4-block radius. It is important because we have been turned down for every grant in the city of Indianapolis. As we talk about reconciliation, we often forget truth. I wrote a little something yesterday to kind of start, to kick this talk off, and it's about baptismal. In the United Methodist Church, we say we remember our baptism. How do we do that? To remember is a very important word. It reminds us that we're all part of a body that is higher than us, a body that we're all connected to. Memories are echoes of our ancestors, the essence of our truths, past and present. Memories are the notes, the music of our future, that remind us that progress of humanity is dependent on its ability to fall in love with one another. Fall in love with humanity and everything in its ecology to reconcile our current truths. Our stories must not just be heard, they must be seen. We often talk about reconciliation without seeing truths. In 2008, I had the pleasure of spending time in Cape Town and a few of the townships, Guguletu, Kailicha, and Langa, where the people used the greeting Sawubona, and they answered in reply, Sekona, meaning, I see you, and it's good to be seen. What a powerful greeting in the face of apartheid, in the face of actively stopping people from being seen and remembered. We often talk about reconciliation without seeing one another. Right now, I'm going to share a history of our story through my mother's eyes. So I just told you that I was born in South Bend, Indiana. My family migrated there in the 1930s. It was the only place where African Americans could live at, and it was on the west side of South Bend, and they called it the lake. In its ecology, the Kankakee River flowed underground and bubbled up into what we call Beck's Lake. We just called it the swamp. My grandmother and grandfather were neighbors as young people. She never really paid attention to him until she got older. And then they got married. And in 1952, my mother was born. She's the oldest of four. Now let me stop and tell you what it looked like in that neighborhood. That it was old block houses, coal stove right in front of it, and each house had a little square of land. Across the swamp, it's where the city would often dump its discarded materials. It was where Memorial Hospital would often dump its biohazard. I knew this because my uncle talked about playing over the needles. You see, no one treated those people as if they were sacred. There were no such thing as services. So the day that my mother was born, my grandfather planted a tree. And in that tree, they cultivated a lot of things. That house was known as the place when people didn't have anything at all, didn't have a place to stay, they would show up there. Now, my grandmother wore the pants, and she also made the pants. She worked at food service at Notre Dame, and she would often tell stories about working there and seeing pro football players. Now, she talked about giving Joe Montana an extra steak. Now, my grandfather had a hard time keeping down jobs, but he was an artisan. He was a quartet singer. Sam Cooke would often come to those housing projects with his quartet group, and they would all leave together, and they would go sing. He was also known for keeping the best lawn in that place. And as that tree started to grow, my mother and her friends started to grow. They would often gather around that tree in times of crisis. And they would listen to my grandfather and those people tell stories. And they would figure out how they was going to survive the next day. Now, I said the outside didn't treat that place like it was sacred, but you didn't step on Uncle Buck's grass because that was sacred ground. And he had often said to the young people as they would leave the tree and use the scripture that life is truly abundant. The people in those housing projects that we did not see treated each other as if they were sacred. In 2010, I was in Thunder Bay, Canada, working with a group of First Nation folk. That's Native Americans here. And we were there to do, a friend of mine and myself were there to do an ABCD training. Imagine that, I'm going there to train people what they already know how to do. But to set context for that day, The elder got up and he said to the audience that we are not here to build community, we are here to remember it. Let's say that one more time. We are not here to build community, we are here to remember it. That stuck with me profoundly, the word remember. And every time it comes up to remember our baptismal, I am reminded of not only my story, but our story. The trauma that people face, the gifts and talents that are uncovered when we get together. So when me and my neighbors got together, we started to figure out, what do we invest in? The first thing we realized is that people are cut off from other people. People in my neighborhood often don't get people like you to come sit at their dinner tables. So we knew that what we had to do is to cultivate social capital. So most of my neighbors know me as a banker, and what I bank is relationships. You come to my house, if you need something, leave me 3 names, right? In return, my neighbors get to do these trainings. They make about $200 an hour. They make $1,500 a day. They give me 20% of that. And we as neighbors actively go give it out to other neighbors. And this is what we give it to. We don't do an RFP. We only give it to things that are actually happening. We don't ask you to dream because the institution has stopped us from dreaming. It has actively not allowed us to be seen. I mean, all the way down to policy, even when we talk about church, that we're often asked to come to a place of power. So after we started doing that, we said, when we give money out, we say you have to fail at least 3 times. We took a trip to MIT, me and my neighbors, and visited Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Dufalo, and Abhijit said that poor people are penalized for failing. We must be seen. Then we say to our people that after you fail, you can't do what you do already alone anymore. And you can't do anything obscene or illegal. Sometimes we stretch on the illegal end. Some of the things that's popped up in the couple years we've been doing this, there were parties that people started to convene. There was one party on the block that no one ever shows up. 1,100 people showed up. It cost us $300. So y'all getting a theme here. The return on investment is huge. It is huge when you allow people to give what they already have. If we not only see people, we act in a way that is abundant. That not when we give, we don't give in the sense of charity. We give in a sense of emergency. And we say, we need you. We need what you have to offer. One of my favorite sermons is Acts 3, where the lame leap for joy. And we all know that scripture where they bring the man to the beautiful gate, and he asks for alms, and all the good-going church folk would give it to him. And Peter and John, we know the favorite part of that scripture, silver and gold we have none. All that we have, in the name of Christ, all that we have, get up and walk, or something like that. I'm not a biblical scholar. But looking back at the scripture, the most important part of that scripture is where Peter and John looked at the lame beggar, and they intently looked at him. They looked into his eyes. They purposely saw beyond what other people could see. And then they asked him, look at us. Think about going to a food pantry and how shameful it is not to be like somebody else, and how we have our heads down, and then somebody say, I see you, brother. I see you, sister. That is very important. When I say $2.2 million, one of the ways that was done was with parties. Parties is a way that we invest in our truest self. I'm going to close the talk with a video. And it's parties that we show in our house.
And we purposely do this in the homes of people because these are the hosts in our neighborhood. These are the people we go to when trouble goes on. This is what happens after midnight, after all the programs close down. These are the people that gather together and help us and save us.
I run a foundation, and I always feel like I have the right intentions, but I don't always have the right answers, and I don't always have the right connections. And I feel like tonight I'm joyous because I learned a lot about who the right connections are and where the wisdom lies. So thank you, Nathan.
I'm gonna have to think about this for a while because I am really overcome with the hope and joy that you have expressed tonight and the faith in yourselves and each other, in your intelligence and really expertise about how to address some of the problems in your community.
This work is 17 years of practice, cultivating structures that are built for human capacity, with the main ingredient is friendship. Thank you all. Thank you, friends. Thank you, neighbors.
That day, there were $10 million sitting in our living room. Some of everybody, 60 people. All the music, all the food was cultivated and paid for by our neighbors. So please look at each other and say, no longer do I call you servants, but friends. No longer do I call you servants, but friends. Thank you.